It's been nearly 6 weeks now since I arrived in Piha. The studio was obviously empty, the canvases were ready, they were delivered, paints were sent from the UK. When I first arrived, it was important that I actually didn't start any work at all. So I spent most of the time walking. I went out with a camera and a sketchbook in the immediate area of Piha, Kitty Falls, White Beach, local coastal paths, Kari, and of course Piha Beach itself, at different tides. The first thing that I had to struggle with was obviously the jet lag, but primarily the difference in light and how intensely focused it all felt. I'd read about it, so I'd kind of been forewarned in many ways, but nothing could prepare for the actuality of feeling like I'd just been given a new prescription. As I say, the clarity was so intense, it questioned reality in many respects. The sharpness and focus, the intensity of colour, everything was blazing. It was hot, it was humid. It felt completely different to anything else that I'd experienced when travelling. I was kind of thrown to begin with because I didn't know quite where I could start dealing with that. So I made a determined commitment to try not to have any expectations at all from the work, and to acquaint myself with being here, acquaint myself with building a studio that I felt comfortable with. I mean, as you can see, the studio is absolutely fantastic. It has given me a real sense of belonging and place here. And I've been able to very quickly feel at ease with creating in a new space. Often it takes a long time to get to know a studio, you know, where the particular hot spots are in the studio, where you can make good decisions, if you like, because that seems to be what and how my studio operates in Wales. There are particular areas in the studio that the painting can be read more accurately, at perhaps slightly oblique angles rather than front on, where the light catches in a particular way, particular distance from the painting, from the picture plane. So those hot spots and areas of the studio where radical decisions could be made, good decisions could be made, actually came really quite quickly, which I was relieved to find. I started, after about a couple of weeks, working with some small pieces, and the immediate bush of the garden here at Earthskin, and it was the light penetrating many of the leaves that really drew my attention. And it was that kind of simplicity of the kind of transparency in the leaf and the beautiful colour in the green that gave me my first few paintings. There were a couple of issues in terms of lighting in the studio needed to be adjusted. At one point it was quite harsh, quite cold, so we changed that, and I could again be a little bit more sensitive in my colour mixing. I was very aware that I could force issues and force a change upon my work, and I think that's probably the most difficult thing when an artist travels. I always find it very difficult to work quickly in a sketchbook, too immediately when I arrive at a new place in a sketchbook, because I find myself being drawn into the kind of picturesque, the drawings that are sort of mementos or souvenirs of place, rather than the act of drawing to learn a place. So they become pictures, illustrations almost. I've been able to travel a little bit. I've been able to travel to Rotorua, Tongariro, which I didn't do the pass, or the crossing. Here we have, you know, incredible sulphurous oranges, silicas, the weeping colours at Oraki Karako. They really drew me in very quickly because the energy in the process for how the colours oozed out of that land married up very quickly with the process of making in painting. And so the kind of way that the colour is forced to bleed and run and smudge and drag on the surface of the linen is quite similar to the process that is creating those structures and colours in the land. Oranges and greens and blues together would have definitely, previous to this trip, been a combination that I perhaps would have stayed very clear of. You know, there is an awkwardness when you use new colour combinations and juxtapositions, but because I'd seen them and I'd felt that I'd genuinely responded to place, they weren't putting them together, or didn't feel like I was putting them together for an aesthetic reason or an experiment for the sake of it. So it's all felt incredibly humble and honest. I've got 18 paintings now in 6 weeks, which has probably been the most prolific of outputs that I've ever experienced. So the pressure doing this kind of residency is extremely different, knowing that X amount of paintings need to be delivered for that particular show within X amount of time, 6 weeks, has been really demanding. But I genuinely feel that each and every painting has worked. There's not one that I feel is weaker than the other, and that is so unusual. I think to build up a body of work that I can leave in New Zealand that fully represents my trip here, but also fully represents me as an artist responding to a new place. The studio here set in Earthskin couldn't be any better. It is the most idyllic of settings. The windows are open, of course it's summer. Chickens come to visit each day. There's wildlife in the garden. Nature is in abundance with a joyous offspring of fruits and vegetables. I'm now nearly going to pack up the studio, and unfortunately, with the world events as they are, I've been forced to pack up earlier than anticipated. It really hurts to feel that that deadline has been brought forward, not so much because I was rushing work. I think I finished the work in plenty of time, but I feel like I'm packing up the studio before I need to. And I was looking forward to a period of musing with paintings in the studio to learn them before they got packed away. Titles have been quite radically different than what I would usually title works back in the UK. In the UK, titles may have been very simple, one word, onomatopoeic, emotional ways into the painting. But I think it was important here in New Zealand to be far more specific about titles, of where they had been originated, and these canvases and works, to give them an identity and reference that was from their original source and location, whether that was Araki Karako or Kitty Kitty Falls, Thorn Bay in Takapuna. The signature mark making and use of oil and wax is something that obviously I've been keen to reuse here in New Zealand. I use palette knives, I don't use brushes. Palette knives and fingers wiping, simultaneously wiping and creating and destroying the surface. That balance, that tension of construction and destruction has always been important in the way that I paint. The layering of thick wax and oil, and then the bleeding of solvents and turpentine sprays into and across the surface, flooding the canvas, so that almost lose control, almost lose the image where it starts to run and bleed together. And then there's a kind of an immediate wrestle and confrontation to hold that back from being completely obliterated and lost, with rags wiping the turpentine back into the surface, being able to wipe away, almost like a kind of monoprint in printmaking. It's really important what is not in the painting for me, what has been left out. The sense of what is missing, that balance between what I have revealed and what I have withheld. It's almost a play like the Japanese art of flower arranging, ikebana, where there's tension between the space and tension between the mark or gesture and colour. All my works deny the sense of horizon. The sense of scale is there. In many of the works there's a sense of a hinted perspective, but the horizon is absent because that denies the true sense of your own person scale when you stand in front of the painting. What I enjoy is the ambiguity of the play between the microcosm and the macrocosm, the sense of small and large simultaneously. I enjoy playing with photographs that have a macro ability to get in really tight to rock structures and geology formations and colourings that enable me to blow that up and scale up so that they hint at possible sand patinations or continents drifting or weather patterns, and that kind of element of geography and geology combine in the way I paint. They all celebrate beauty. They celebrate the beauty in nature, but they celebrate beauty in the world and in the landscape in particular. They avoid a human presence other than the human presence of the viewer themselves when they're engaged with the work. When I'm working on the beach or photographing or drawing, I tend to avoid walking and working with footsteps that other people have seen that particular or experienced that rock. So I'll tend to isolate myself. And that isolation has been sort of enhanced with the true isolation in the residency, the time to find peace and the quiet of being alone day in, day out in the studio, and the routine that has been set of working and walking the beach and then working and walking, working and walking, has been an incredibly rich one.